Hello and welcome to our second episode of the Self-Wealth Real Estate Podcast with me, your host, Luke Boyron. Today, I'm talking to a friend of mine. His name's Tom Pobojewski. He is a realtor, second-generation realtor, but on top of that, he is one of the highest volume flippers. He's a bit of a secret weapon. He's a bit of a super spy. He's incredibly successful. I actually really like how he operates. There's a lot of things he does that are very similar to me. And he has a really, really successful flipping company, owns a bunch of rentals. And I don't know how he does everything he does. He's just such a successful real estate investor and a good all-around person. And he helps list a lot of properties for my team. So I really like working with him, and I'm really happy with the conversation we had today. He has some stories about how deals haven't worked out and amazing stories about how they have worked out. So look out for the case study and his worst deal segment, because that is where we learn the most. So thanks so much for watching again, and let's bring Tom in. Welcome. We have Tom Pobojewski joining us on the Self-Wealth Real Estate Podcast. Tom, is that how you pronounce your name?
That is pretty good there, honestly. That is it.
All right. Well, it's a Polish last name, right? So those are always a little longer. So I've known Tom a long time now, and we've worked together a lot. Tom is a lot of things. I'm going to let him introduce himself a bit, but I will say we work with Tom a lot, our team, both as a buyer of our wholesale properties and as a realtor. Tom actually lists a lot of our properties that we list on the MLS as well. So we work with Tom a lot. I think he's an awesome guy, and I'm really excited to have him on for this podcast. So Tom, can you tell us a little bit about you and what you do?
Yeah, first off, I want to say thanks for having me on your show. It's an amazing opportunity, and I'm happy to share my my experience being a real estate investor. So to give you a bit about myself, I'm actually a licensed real estate agent, and I've been doing that for about 13 years now. Previous to that, I was actually a chartered accountant. So I used to work downtown for one of the big four firms, and I didn't really like the corporate life. It didn't really suit me, and after about 6 years, I decided to get my license as a real estate agent after flipping a couple of properties and becoming a full-time realtor. From that point, I've been doing the traditional sort of realtor, helping people move from A to B, which is a big market, but my niche has been actually flipping properties. So I've developed a bit of a system, which I can kind of explain a little later about, how to help really everyday people buy, renovate, and sell properties for profit. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. And I lost count how many so-called deals I've done, but it's been, quite a few in that time frame.
And I believe you also have a rental portfolio.
Yeah, so I definitely have a rental portfolio. So that's like my long game. So I kind of divvied up my real estate investing into two sides. One is the short game, one is the long game, much like in golf, right? You've got those two kind of ways of playing it. The short game being flipping properties. So that's actively, constantly buying, selling, renovating, and getting that income, and then putting that income into long-term assets. So that is, I put them into single family, duplexes, some multifamily, and then from there refinancing those properties and using that money to put back into flipping. So using that working capital to kind of go in that, I call it an artesian well at the end of the day.
Oh, what is an actual artesian well for people who don't know? Because I only found that out a few years ago when we had one at a cottage.
I don't know if I'll do the explanation justice, but essentially it goes in perpetuity. Is the idea, right? Is that it goes in a cycle where, in this case, we've got money that's going from, in my case, flipping property. So let's say you get $50,000 on the flip, you put that into, let's say, a single family home, then refinance in a few years from now, you pull that equity and then you put it back into a flip property. And that's essentially as simple as it gets.
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah. We have, one of our cottages has an artesian well, which, again, I haven't looked it up, but my understanding of what happens at our well is water actually comes out the top all the time. We actually have it drain out into the lake. So yeah, basically, instead of having a well just full of water sitting there and you pump it out, it's actually running all the time. So that's a really good comparison for your business and how you set it up. And I think there's a lot of similarities in our business, both doing the long game, the short game, kind of combining those. I think that's obviously, obviously, I think you're doing something smart. If I'm doing something similar, I'd like to think I'm doing the same thing and we're both doing well. Tom, how did you, I know you were saying, you were doing this on the side as you were a CA. How did you get into this? How did you start?
Yeah, so I was I was a Bay Street guy. I was downtown making my salary, and I was always thinking to myself, how do I get ahead financially? Because even though I was making a decent salary, I noticed that I wasn't saving as much as I thought I was after, savings and living costs. And at first I said, okay, let's try this idea of stock trading. And I did that for a couple of years in like 07, 08, 09. And if you remember what happened there, we had the bubble burst, and with that, about 40% of what I invested. But I didn't quit. Yeah, exactly. So it was a lesson learned. So I decided to get into real estate investing, and my father actually is a realtor as well. So I'm a second generation realtor, and he introduced me to this idea of flipping. And so we did one property together, and it was about, let's say, about 15K. It was actually a Mississauga. I'll describe a little bit. It was a Mississauga townhome, about 100,000 in Dundas there and Dixie area. And we were able to renovate it, sell for about, I think it was 180 or so back then. And we split the profits 50-50. And I think I netted, my share was about 15K, and took that and went on a trip to Costa Rica.
That's fun.
But from there, I was just like, you know what? I think I can do this as kind of a side hustle. And so I had this salary job, and I was doing maybe 1, 2, 3 properties a year, making 10, 15, 20,000. And it was more than my bonus at work. And from there, it kind of grew, and it started to invest into long-term assets. And then one thing led to another. And I just decided, hey, I'd rather be working for myself and getting involved in real estate investing, and specifically in the sales, and hence got my license and did it full time, and I never looked back.
Awesome. I think it's funny, the similarities when you're saying, you're second generation realtor. I'm not a realtor. I am active in real estate, active investor, active real estate business. But I also come, as you know, my father was a real estate agent. My brother's a real estate agent. So it's funny, the similarities on what we do and kind of how we got to where we are. Another similarity I noticed is we both kind of came from a professional background. I was a lawyer, you were a CA. What do you think, kind of that professional background, the training, and just the kind of experience, do you think that has helped in your real estate investing?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. If anything, numbers are important. So I learned to do like financial modeling. It's not really complicated financial modeling we do, but still, you kind of get a good grasp of numbers. At the same time, though, like, you're being exposed to like CFOs and corporate executives, and from there they became also my mentors. I started to look at the way they look at things, right? It's through little lessons here and there, and I brought that into what I do today, right? I run a sales business, I run an investment business, and there were these moments aha moments where you would be able to apply that to what I'm doing today. So that mentorship definitely meant a lot. And at the same time, it's like you bring that professionalism into, quite honestly, an industry where, I mean, it's got professionalism, but again, you bring out like the corporate side into something that's, I think, more entrepreneurial at the end of the day.
Yeah, I agree with you a lot. I think it's interesting. It's something I think about because you do hear a lot of people on social media saying how you don't need to go to university, you don't need college, you don't need an education. And I struggle with that because I agree with them. You don't need it, but it's not like it doesn't help. It doesn't hurt you to have it. It doesn't hurt that I went to law school and had legal training and all of that, because I think it does introduce you to, as you said, a more professional way of thinking, a more, it can bring you to a higher standard, and it's possible to reach that standard on your own, but it's much less likely, I find, to reach that standard without that kind of background. So it's absolutely possible. You don't have to finish high school, and you can still take my father. He left school when he was 14, self-educated, very successful, real estate agent, commercial real estate agent and investor. He didn't need the education, but the reality is most people don't take the steps on their own to self-educate and improve themselves. And so if you don't do that, then you won't be at the same level as someone who has gone through the training in many cases. So
yeah, I remember like university really was about, can you finish what you started, right? It's 4 years. A lot of people took courses and certain programs that they didn't go, pursue anthropology, some of those sort of arts, especially liberal arts programs. But the real question was the employer wants to know, hey, can this person follow through, right? Do they have the character and also the kind of I'd say the work ethic to basically follow through on something, as I mentioned earlier. So here's a question: is would you allow your daughter to go to university, or like would you, not allow is the right word, but more or less recommend your daughter to go to university or some post-secondary school?
Yeah, I would recommend her to go to university, but I would absolutely support her if she chose not to, as long as it wasn't out of laziness. I think that's the difference. If she is excited to start a business and, I can support her in that, and she wants to, do this thing she's really excited about, and she's going to do it passionately, put in a strong effort, and really work to succeed in that, like that drive, that determination for success, she doesn't need to have that in school. As long as she has that, I'll support her in whatever it is she's doing. The difference is I don't want her to not go to school, take, the first job that she can for minimum wage and just, smoke weed and sit on a couch all day. Like that's not okay. And so if it's that where she has the teenage laziness, which is, I think we all had a little bit of that teenage-itis. If she has that instead, and say, well, you're going to, if you've got nothing better to do, then you might as well go to school. But if you're passionate about something other than going to school, go and do that. Follow your passions for sure. How do you feel?
Well, I loved the university. Okay. I thought it was a great growing experience for me. And quite honestly, I got involved in like clubs and so on. It's kind of my first entrepreneurial experience. So it's what do you make of it ultimately? I mean, I went to business school, did the accounting, went to co-op, right? I mean, it made money. So it paid for itself essentially. So it's like what you make of it. And I would honestly recommend it to my two boys and daughter for sure. But to your point, do you need to go? No, absolutely not. I was basically told to go as a kid, right? It was like, mom and dad went to university, so are you. But I definitely, if I was to do it again, I would do it again. Yeah, for sure.
Something I remember my dad always telling me, he didn't finish high school. He left school when he was 14, grew up on a farm, left school when he was 14, and he was successful. But he always pushed us to go get education, but he always pushed us to challenge what we were learning in school, because he didn't want us to end up like an MBA who only knew how to read spreadsheets and didn't understand how to function in society, how to, interpret more than just data, right? He didn't want us to be that kind of person. And I did get my MBA. And I'd like to think I kind of questioned what I was learning or making the relevance of it to make sure that it was practical in life. So let's get back on the real estate. Enough of a sidetrack. So you were telling me, now, something I know about you. I don't know how you do everything you do. You do a ton with our team. You're always looking at flips. Sometimes when we're buying flips for other wholesalers, you're our competition. On top of that, you're listing properties for us. You're listing properties for a ton of other people. I know for that to function, you have a lot of systems. You mentioned earlier you have a system for helping investors or clients with flips. Can you tell us about that system?
Yeah, sure. Let me tell you a little bit about what I learned about flipping properties for 12 years. I mean, whenever I had questions from clients or anyone saying, how do you do this? They fell into basically kind of three sort of pillars or three buckets at the end of the day, right? So some people have questions about, hey, is this a good deal? Is this, where do I get the financing? Is it going to sell? Like all the questions that emerged. And really it got put into like three buckets, right? It really was all about what is the deal or the property involved, right? So that would be like, is it a good deal? Will it sell? What is the after repair value? So essentially the property becomes the first pillar. Second was financing. It's like, how are you going to finance the deal? Are you going to, for example, is it going to appraise? Will you use, what's the source of capital? What is the interest rate? So that covers that pillar. And then lastly, who's going to do the work, right? Is it going to be the contractor? Is it going to be you as the investor, right? Do you have the talent to do that? And hence, when I kind of put this all together, it was just like answering those three things is, about the property, about the financing, and then the contractor. So if I was able to provide solutions to all those three things, the decision for the investor became pretty easy, right? So that's essentially the system in a nutshell. And I put together like actually an ebook, which I'll talk about later, that just describes that in a little more detail. But when you really break it down, that is the system in its kind of simplest form.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I'd love to hear it. Obviously, this isn't a sales pitch but it's really good to know. I mean, I agree with you. Those are the things you need to understand. And the fact that you're able to provide that for clients is a really cool way for you to do business as well. And it's a really cool way for people wanting to get in and kind of do their first few deals to have that support when they're starting. It just reduces, it's kind of like having a mentor, right? And it reduces your risk of something going wrong because of an unexpected expense, didn't run your numbers right. So just having that system. But in your case, you doing it with clients, it's just a really cool way because you make money obviously as an agent, but then you're giving them an opportunity to get into this and they can get a feel of how much they like it. And some people, I'm sure some of your clients go on and do a ton of them, and some kind of do one or two and decide maybe that's not for me. I think that's
I think if anything, we as agents try to provide value wherever we can. So it's not just, hey, let's put a for sale sign on the front yard, right? It's like if I can help someone find a great deal, source them the money to do it, and as well provide them with the contractor or the people to complete the job, and then we list it together, and then we do it again. It's where I can kind of add value along the whole chain.
Yeah. Well, I always like to look at how people make money, right? Anyone I work with, it's like, how do you make money? It's like, oh, okay, so you're making money as an agent and you do all these things for me. Okay, well, that makes sense. I like it, because if let's say you weren't making money as an agent, it's like, okay, so I need to make money from this side of it, from that side of it, right? So, I like the way that's set up. And honestly, it helps so much. Obviously my home base, I live in Ottawa. I'm from Toronto. So those are the areas where it's easiest for me to get recommendation for contractors. We have kind of a deeper, our construction manager in-house is based out of Ottawa. He has a really deep roster of trades here. So it makes it a lot easier for us to do renovations as a company in Ontario. We're also doing flips out in BC, in Vancouver. Currently have one ongoing in Maple Ridge and another one in Pitt Meadows. It's such a different process for us bringing on contractors there because we don't have the relationships with people in the same way to get referrals, to get recommendations. And it's made it so much harder for us starting out. So I was just talking to somebody the other day and they were asking, how do you find contractors for it? And referrals are the number one way to find the right type of contractor. Because, and luckily I think we found the right contractors for those ones. But, the first contractor who walked through, his quotes came in more than double what I wanted to pay basically. And they were beautiful quotes. He did whole drawings of the house, floor plans and how the changes would be and kitchen plans. And it looked beautiful, but it's like, this is the wrong contractor. I always like to joke.
It doesn't fit your model at the end of the day, right?
No,
Contractors will be at a spectrum of pricing, right? You've got quotes all over the place. And hence you got to find the right one that fits your business model. I'm sure it's a fantastic person, but
they're probably a very good contractor. Yeah. Yeah. But they're also, when I see a contractor show up in a fancy truck, I go, who's paying for that?
You know what is funny though? Whenever I see like a branded shirt on a contract, this may sound bad, but if I see something the more branding and so forth, all of a sudden, to your point, like who's paying for that, right?
The price starts going up, yeah.
The price starts going up. But the other trick I learned with contractors too, is are they doing the work, or are they a passive GC where they're managing multiple jobs? If they're not, then all of a sudden, usually I find that their costing will be more because of the way they're set up. Hence, for me personally, I've always found the contractor that is hands-on but has a small crew has been the most efficient and the right fit for the business that at least I'm running.
Yes, I that's actually a very good observation, a good way of putting it. Contractor who's going to be in there working on the job site. Sometimes they might have two job sites on the go at the same time. That's kind of the most I find that it's still going to make sense. And then they have a couple people on the team working on the job site. And then they still sub out part of the projects. They still have their electricians and plumbers where needed, HVAC techs. Sometimes we bring in our own, sometimes they have their own. But that general who kind of can install the trim and install the doors and things like that for you, and do some of the finishing things. That it's almost like you need the finished carpenter is often your best general contractor.
I've also learned one rule. One of my cardinal rules is, as a flipper, is if you're not a contractor, do not become one, because you will hate it. Okay, it's not as easy as it looks, and anyone that's done it regrets it after.
I learned my first house. I would work on evenings and weekends. I was an undergrad, and I was just working on this house, and I ended up having a 10-bedroom rooming house at Jane and Finch. And I know when I looked at it at the end, the rent I would have collected had I finished it 6 months earlier would have added up to enough to account for all of the rest. All that lost revenue or everything that it would have cost me. Added up in that way.
That's why we got you.
Tom, one thing I want to talk to you about is one of the reasons I wanted to get you on this is you're one of the few investors I've talked to who didn't stop flipping as the market changed through 2022. You're one of the people I talked to who was still flipping, still buying, still making money on flips because so many investors kind of pulled back in fear. So kind of what's been your experience and what are you seeing, and why did you keep going? Why did you keep flipping when prices were falling and all of that?
I guess I needed to make money for starters. So still got a family to feed. But what I've learned doing this for like 12, 13 years is obviously you got to manage your risk, but the more consistently you do it, the more likely you're going to hit what I like to call a home run, right? So in 2022, yes, the market changed. I was still flipping and buying properties for myself. And what I did was I did scale back that, however, cautiously getting into it. In one case, one property, for example, I didn't end up selling it. I couldn't make the money back, so I kept it. In another case, I barely broke even. However, in late fall and in December, I almost felt I was one of the few buyers out there, quite honestly. And I was dealing with wholesalers and other sorts of other vendors, and it was nice to be negotiating favorable terms without getting into competition. And sure enough, acquired a few of these properties and did amazing on them during that time frame. And that wasn't just for myself. It was also, like I said, I purchased on behalf of clients, and the clients flipped them and made really good money. And really the lesson there is stick with your strategy. Of course, manage your risk, but stick with the strategy and do it consistently, because you're going to see the results in both good and bad, so-called bad times.
Yeah. I think about that quote, which is way overdone. The one from Warren Buffett that says, be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when others are fearful. And that quote gets shared in the investor community all the time. I'm sure you see it all the time too, right, Tom? Like all the time. Or you see
I put it on a presentation actually.
Did you?
Live. Yeah, I put it there on one of your live segments.
Well, there you go. So it's one of those quotes that everyone knows. People hear it all the time. But the reality is all these investors who are posting it, they weren't buying when others were fearful, right? They weren't greedy when others were fearful. You and I are some of the only active flippers I know who are still doing consistent volume through the market change. So, I think that's it was really smart of you to keep going. And obviously you were able to get better deals from it. And now you're, maybe you took a couple losses, but the margins on the other ones you're going to make are more than going to account for that. So that's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And like right now, I mean, this being right now in May, we're seeing things pick up and there's competition, and because everyone's seeing the fact that, well, that when the market's rising, but also they catch wind of people making money. So hence now the competition is much more fierce, I'm finding, especially in the more, let's say, bigger markets like Kitchener, Waterloo as an example, or Toronto.
Well, since we were just talking about some deals that didn't go well, we're going to move on to the next section of the show where we're going to talk about our worst and our best deals. And I like to start with the worst deals because I find really they're like case studies, and that's where you're going to learn the most. When something goes wrong, it's when you learn the most and you can take that. When something goes right, sometimes it's harder to have lessons, but you have lessons from both. So, Tom, what's the worst deal you've ever done? And can you share some details about it and lessons learned?
Worst deal, eh? Might have two, but I'll spend maybe a little time on one of them because I think there's a lot of lessons there. So I have it was a flip property, and I kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier in our segment. It was a flip in Hamilton at the time. So this was purchased in, I want to say it was January of 2022. So we were in the heat of the market. Deals were a little scarce. And I remember I was up north and I'm looking at, this is provided by a wholesaler, and I'm looking at this deal and thinking, okay, I see it. I see the opportunity. And hence I put an offer on it. And partly the reason I put an offer was I wanted to stay busy. I was chasing deals, right? For lack of a better term. So I looked at it like, okay, yeah, I think we can go. And I bought it for $540, detached, 3 bedrooms in nearby where the Tim Hortons field is.
Mm-hmm.
No parking, needs a ton of work. And I only went based on the photos. I didn't even see the property, but I put a sight unseen offer firm. And I have some experience with Hamilton, but I wouldn't say this was a century home, right? So let's just say there's a lot more potentially hidden defects from it. Nonetheless, put an offer on it. We secured the property. And when I took possession, or even a week before I visited, and one thing I didn't realize was the stench of cat pee and dog feces. There were photos, but obviously you can't smell those, right?
Yep.
And I was like, downplay. I'm like, okay, it shouldn't be too bad. We'll just clean it up. It took us about 3 months to renovate. Unfortunately, the market did shift on during that time frame. Everything went down about 20%. So remember, I bought this for $540. My break even is about $660 on this, right? Just to break even. Try to sell it. It's I would say the best offer I had was maybe $550, $570, right? So tough pill to swallow if you want to take that type of haircut. But going back to the smell, I think, first off, what did we do to get rid of it? We took out some drywall from the ceiling because the feces and the cat urine was going between the floorboards and to the ceiling and the drywall below. So we removed all that. We also sprayed it. My guy sprayed with some sort of spray. I may not know the technical term for it, but it was to neutralize the smell. And still it stunk. Then we cleaned out the ducts. Still it stunk. It got lesser and lesser each time, but you get the picture. Like it would just linger constantly, and that was the biggest complaint. So I decided to rent it out to actually for decent rent, more or less to cover, and just wait till markets change. Because one thing I learned, I'll tell you something, Lucas. Going back 2017, we also had similar market conditions where the market went up 30% and then down 30% because of the announcement of the Fair Housing Act, I believe it was called. Basically, it was the foreign buyer tax, right, and a few other provisions. And what I learned was that if you were patient enough, the market would rebound. In that case, it took roughly about 2-3 years for the market to get back to its high water mark. So having that kind of background, I was like, okay, let's just keep this. We'll just rent it out and so forth. Eventually, we were able to get the smell out from the third air duct cleaning. That's eventually how it. I think it's gone now. However, I still own this property today, rent it out. I still probably won't be able to get my money back. However, like I said, renting it out for the time being. But the lessons learned were, one, like chasing deals, right? So this was, again, something that I was kind of making the numbers work and so on. And probably, obviously, in hindsight's 2020, maybe think differently about it. And I'm familiar with buying properties sight unseen. I've done it many times. But I think if you don't know the area very extremely well, and especially if it's a century home, you probably want to visit the property. And in this case, yeah, it would have been worthwhile to get a smell check, right? So from here on in, I've actually asked the other side, if I haven't seen the properties, what does it smell like inside?
That's an important question. What does it smell like inside? And it's that's one of the reasons it's always important. I try to have someone from my team go see it, or someone I trust. Doesn't have to be my team. And the question is, do the floors slope, especially in old houses? And is there a smell? Because it's very hard to see, unless it's very significant, or if you look really closely, it's hard to tell how much a floor slopes in pictures. Actually, Tom, you're about to list one of my houses and the floor slopes. That's, it's solid now, but it was kind of resupported after it had sunk a bit. And so it's solid now, but we're going to be listing it like that. It's the cost of fixing it isn't worthwhile. So yeah, it's hard to tell from pictures, that even though, we kind of knew on that one, but it's hard to tell from pictures how much a floor slopes. And if you don't take that into account, in this case, we were able to take into account in our price, but if you don't take that into account, you're gonna be like, why is this place not selling? Or, you're going to start the renos and go, oh my goodness, it's like crazy kitchen in here. I'm falling over. I feel drunk when I'm walking around. Yeah. And it's funny, just so many similarities between your story and mine. I lost 90 grand on a flip that I did in 2017. And you bought yours before the market changed, in this case, the 2022 market, before it started changing, before interest rates were hiking. So I think the hike started February, March. But mine I bought after, because I looked at that 16-point government housing plan you mentioned, fair housing or whatever it was, and I didn't think the regulations were that significant. I mean, part of it was the foreign buyer's tax, but the foreign buyer aspect was blown out of proportion because people would see, for example, Asian people at an open house, and they'd go, oh, it's all Chinese buyers. Those Asian people are permanent residents or Canadian citizens. They just also speak Mandarin. I speak French. You speak Polish, right, Tom?
Yep.
So if I'm speaking French in an open house, that doesn't mean I'm a foreign buyer. But I think there was an element there that people would see someone who was from a different ethnicity and assume they're foreign buyers, while they're, they would have been exempt from that foreign buyer ban. They would have had, permanent resident, work visa, or they're citizens. And so I looked at those changes. I'm like, none of these are really significant. The market's overreacted. It's going to bounce right back. So prices have fallen a little bit. I bought a deal off a wholesaler, and I made a bunch of mistakes on the way. This isn't about my lessons today, but I lost 90 grand on a flip, and I sold it instead of carrying it because I needed the remaining capital in it back, and it would have been significantly cash flow negative at the rates I had. So I took the hit, took a 90 grand loss, and that was painful. But yeah, we all take the hits, and that's where we learn the most lessons.
But you stay the course, right? At the end of the day, like I found that the strongest flippers, they're the ones that, okay, they take the losses, they take the bumps, they move on. They don't necessarily say, oh, it is not working for me, and then try something else.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I'm even, that's why I think I'm setting up my podcast this way, because I really like this. I think Socrates says something like, a smart man learns from the mistakes of, learns from his mistakes, and a wise man learns from the mistakes of others. So I'm hoping people who listen to this podcast can learn from our mistakes and watch out for smells and understand it can take a lot. I'm doing a house right now that has significant smoke damage. Kind of a smoldering fire just covered the whole house in soot. And I very much don't want to finish this house, have a hot summer day, and it smells like a campfire inside, because it's absorbed into the drywall. Like we're going to have to strip a lot of this house back. So yes, smells can be important. And again, luckily, obviously, with the fire damage, it was obvious. But I had to take that into account, that it's not just, oh, the drywall's up, it didn't burn, I can just, paint over it. But that's not the case. The smell's going to come back, and smells can really turn people off. Actually, a little tip for listeners. When this doesn't cover up a big smell, and nor should it, ozone generators are good. You can get inexpensive ones off Amazon. And then also, so Kiehl's Odor Ban is the primer that we spray on everything when we're getting rid of smells. But then the other thing you do when you just have kind of a little bit of a lingering smell, not strong, this is really like for a small amount, there's actually a powder you can buy at hardware stores, like a vanilla scented powder that's made to be mixed into paint. And I like to do it kind of light so it doesn't overwhelm it, but it gives just a light vanilla scent to the house. So I might paint the ceilings with ceiling paint that has some vanilla scent in it, and it just adds a little bit of a pleasant scent that can counteract the small amount of remaining other scent.
There you go. Pro tip right there. I like that.
Smells are important. It makes a big difference. You walk in, house smells all new. It's like a new car smell, Yeah,
it distracts you otherwise, right? You can't you're looking at the beautiful kitchen, but all you can do is smell cat pee.
Doesn't matter how nice your staging is. That's why some people will like bake cookies for an open house, so the house smells like cookies. And I think they even recommend you can put a bowl of vanilla extract in the oven and turn it on at a low heat so that it just radiates this vanilla scent throughout the house. So yeah, some of these little tricks to help with the smell, but it doesn't help if you don't get rid of, the main problem of the smell in the first place. So that's important. And you don't want a buyer to move in later and just be like, I can't live here. So, okay, well, we've learned from your worst deal. So what's your best or just your favorite deal that you can tell us about?
So best, I mean, you can look at two ways of best is, amount dollars, right? What's your best, return, bang for your buck? Or you can look at, as you mentioned, kind of your dollar for effort. I'll go with, you know what? Let's contrast that story to what happened just months before. So I had a townhouse in Mississauga. This was purchased in, let's call it September of 2021, right? So just, as things are changing. And I bought this townhouse on the MLS, okay, in competition for about $590. The idea was to sell it for about $750, probably net about $40,000 at the end of the day. And typical townhouse, 3 bedrooms. We're going to put in 2.5 washrooms, mostly cosmetic work, I would say, for the most part. But we had to change the HVAC system, so it went from electric to gas forced air, and that 10 or 15K investment probably would increase the value by about 30,000 or so, based on the analysis that I've done for that particular area. So as we were finishing this project, this was the one time I was happy that my contractor was, let's call it, late and behind. So as November was approaching, the market was heating up, and I noticed that there's one sale for $800,000, and then $850,000, and then $900,000, right? So things are really heating up. So I listed it in the winter. I remember there were the Christmas holidays, but I didn't take the offers till after. And we had 37 offers on this townhouse, okay? And I was quite honestly exhausted even looking at all 37. It's a lot of work.
I feel bad for the realtors I work with when I'm like, sorry, you got 30 offers you have to deal with.
I know that sounds like something I shouldn't say, but it's like, I got to go through 37 of these. Anyways, it ended up, the winning offer was $997,000 for a condo townhouse in Mississauga.
Sorry, you said 997?
997.
And you were initially planning on selling for 790?
No, 750.
750. Okay. So only 247,000 more than you were initially planning.
Yeah, I was way off.
Okay. And so were your reno expenses about in line with what you had initially anticipated?
Yeah, pretty much. I think I spent about maybe $80K roughly, give or take, from if memory serves me. So, I mean, we're looking at, over $200,000 at the end of the day, net profit. And it closed. That's the beauty of it. Like, it closed, thank goodness, because
yes.
When the market shifts, we saw that some properties would sell for great prices, but let's say they couldn't appraise and so forth. So I definitely wanted that quick closing because for that reason, right? It was a little almost too good to be true, but it did close. Everything worked out. And so that's like the biggest win I ever had. And again, that is a MLS deal. And the reason I stress that is a lot of people say you can't buy flips on the MLS. Well, that is not true. I've done it many times.
Yeah. Yes. Same. We still buy some flips on the MLS here and there, even though we're, private home buyers and, we buy from other wholesalers and, we obviously take down our own deals as well. So yeah, that's an amazing deal. What lessons have you learned from that? Or is there anything that's going to change what you do going forwards?
I mean, lesson learned, again, it was just staying with the strategy, right? Again, I just kept on buying and managing my risk. It's going to sound a little repetitive, but that's the truth. It's just like, I didn't anticipate that. I got lucky, you can say, but I also just kept at doing this, and I'm still doing it today. So hence, I don't expect to do that. Like, I haven't now said I need to make at least $100,000 per flip. That's never been. I shoot for, honestly, about, let's say, 30 to 40K, depending on, of course, the size of the deal. But I would say like that would be my bare minimum in terms of dollars. And then if I catch a wave, great, right? If the market heats up, that's a bonus. So I guess that's what I can share honestly about lessons learned.
Well, and that's why we go over losses too, because we learn more from the losses realistically. But yeah, I agree with you. It's, when you're consistent, you mentioned earlier the home run analogy. I actually use the same analogy. I think if you consistently hit singles and doubles, eventually you do get some home runs. If you're consistently hitting at bat, you're going to get some home runs. If you just wait for the perfect opportunity to get a home run, you may just never even do a deal. And so it's just better to be consistently doing deals. And then you do hit those home runs consistently throughout, just from the law of averages, really. Yeah.
The baseball analogy is great, right? Turn a single into.
Oh yeah, I forgot you're a big baseball fan too.
Yeah, I love the Jays.
Yeah. So it's perfect for you. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad that did well for you, and it's nice when that's an important part of. You run your numbers in a conservative way, so you kind of leave a buffer. So you think you might make 40, but there's also room to make more as well, because you're not super optimistically offering off the highest potential price, and then it doesn't happen, and you're disappointed. In this case, there's room to go higher, and then it did, and then the market carried it as well. But I use a stupid analogy, which is you can't get hit by the money truck if you're not standing in the road, and so you can't.
First time I heard that one. I like that one.
Yeah. So. I mean, if you didn't do that deal to try to get a base hit like 40K, then you wouldn't have made 250,000 on a deal. So.
My only, again, it's always a regret. You wish you bought more, right? That's the thing. And actually, I had like 3 of those types at the time, but I sold 2 of them to clients of mine. So they did just as amazing as well.
Well, there you go.
And that's good for them. They're still loyal. Obviously, they're loyal clients today for that reason.
I rarely regret my decisions if I made them the right decision at the time. I often think of the book by Annie Duke. It's called Thinking in Bets. And she's a professional poker player. And she talks about how if you play a hand that has an 80% chance of losing, but you win that 20%, you have 20% chance only of winning, and you win, you made the wrong decision. You made the wrong play. Whereas if you played a hand that has, let's say, an 80% chance of winning, but you end up losing, you still made the right play. You just had the wrong outcome. So if you're consistently making the right play, you're playing the odds in your favor. So as long as I made the right decision with the hands I had, the cards I had, and where I was, I don't regret that. And I mean, it sounds like you made the right decision for you at the time, sell a couple of these to clients, because had it been the inverse, had that been March of 2022 and you didn't know it, you would have been regretting having 3 of them. So you play the odds, right? And average. Yeah.
You want to manage your risk at the end of the day, right? It's like, okay, what can you stomach? What worst case scenario? What is the outcome here? Can you live with what you're holding on to? And to your point, I love that reference you made actually about how to play like a game of poker. There, that's a good insight there.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, let's move on to our final part, where we have our final question. So, first of all, I wanted to ask, what has changed about your approach to real estate investing with your experience?
Well, for me, I've been giving a lot of thought about, where I want to be in like 5 years and so forth, right? And I've kind of switched to more, I would say, lifestyle investing. So taking on strategies, properties, and approaches that is the way I want to like live my life. So instead of taking, let's say, something that requires a lot of work, responsibility, and effort, I'm taking on, I would say, a portfolio that is manageable and doesn't require, I'd say, a lot of, let's say, not only overhead, but just effort on my part at the end of the day. Because, like, Luke, when I got into real estate investing, at least for me, it was just, I wanted to be financially free, and I kind of wanted to just not, I want to live life on my terms, right? Well, what I found was that real estate got really addictive, sorry. I started buying properties more and more and more and more, to the point that the freedom I was looking for was actually quite the opposite. All I had was like more responsibility, and with that, some more headaches as well. And it was taken away from the freedom that I was looking for. And so hence I look at like my portfolio today. It's nothing, I don't have like 100 properties or anything of that sort, but I look at it today and I'm like, do I really need more as far as even like holdings are concerned? And I would say probably not. Like what I have today is very manageable. It doesn't require as much effort, and it's going to provide me with like the future that I'm looking for.
Absolutely.
And like I've even talked to some people with who got like say 100 properties, and it's interesting that they've scaled back in many cases to a handful of homes because they took on too much and realized that this was not what they wanted out of it. So again, I'll go back to your goals. If your goal is to, you know, have like, you know, Donald Trump, a huge portfolio of different hotels, it's doing great. That's good for you. But
He's also gone bankrupt a couple times along the way. So, you know, it's what you want to do, because I think that makes complete sense. You're talking from the time perspective as well, or ease of kind of managing, and also just from the money perspective. When people pull back, it kind of shores up their financials. A mentor of mine talks about it like, you know, in the first stage, you're building your castle or your kingdom, and then later on, you build a moat around it to protect what you have. You can stop building your kingdom at some point. You start building your moat that protects it from attackers, from interest rate hikes, from lawsuits, from anything that might go wrong. And it sounds like, you know, you've gone to the phase where you're building more of a protected moat.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I guess I'm just looking for like that lifestyle that I want out of real estate investing ultimately. I personally love flips. I still would do that. I find that that's for me fun. I like the fact I don't deal with tenants. I like that it's short term. I like the analysis behind it. As far as the long-term stuff is concerned, you know, I would say I have something I feel is manageable at the end of the day. It will provide me with that lifestyle that I'm looking for, you know, 5-10 years from now. So that's kind of where I've switched it, because I was, again, acquiring properties, becoming this collector almost at the end of the day. And I was just like, is this really what I want?
Yeah.
And so I've kind of changed that perspective.
Yeah, that's great. All right, next question. If you could go back in time, what's one piece of advice you'd have for younger you?
Well, you know, starting earlier is better. Of course, you know, I was 29 or so when I started, which I think is still fairly good age, but I definitely would start earlier. One thing that kind of, I know, emerged for me is I wish I understood more about how the financing works, especially when you're self-financing. There are, like, I'll give you an example, right? Like when you buy your own name, you take away from your credit pool. And what I learned only later on is, like, if I had incorporated and put those under a corporation, I wouldn't necessarily have an effect on my personal credit in many cases. Even if you personally guarantee it, some banks, it will not show up on your credit report. So if you're able to kind of put those properties of the same bank into one corp, and then another corp, and then another corp, you can essentially maximize the amount that you can take on. Technically, you can restructure it and pay the land transfer tax and do all this, but I'm just saying, in hindsight, that's one thing I kind of look back and said, hey, I wish I had known that when I had started, is like how to like properly structure this so that I get the most amount of financing possible.
Yep. And also, I had a similar mistake early on, and well, same issues, but one of mine was I bought a house with two partners, and all three of us were on title. And the mortgage affected me 100%, as if I was for other loans, as if I was responsible for that payment 100%. But the bank only took 1/3 of the rental income, and then still did their rental offsets against that. So they treated it like I had the rights to get 1/3 of the rent, but I was responsible for paying 100% of it. So that actually really limited my ability to borrow at the time. So that was a lesson I learned for you.
Yeah, that's like one there, but like even with automobiles, for your audience, if you're leasing or financing them, you know, that's a mortgage payment. That's going to affect your ability to get capital. And you could raise it elsewhere, but if you can get cheaper financing through your own personal resources, why wouldn't you, right? So hence, oftentimes the bank's not going to tell you that. They just want to get the deal done, right? So you've got to educate yourself on the structure so this optimizes the way you want to acquire properties, and you want to be able to get as much credit as possible.
Yeah, exactly. All right, moving on. What do you think is the most overlooked or the most overhyped investing strategy right now?
Well, I like that question. Overlooked. Here's the thing. All strategies work at the end of the day, right? Depending on your goals and your know-how. I think they're all great strategies. The one that kind of sticks out to me that I feel is being oversold to the consumer right now is this, the pre-construction market. I have nothing against pre-construction. However, I do feel that there are better options out there. And right now, especially in what I find in Toronto, they're trying to sell these pre-construction projects. And there are some benefits, right, to pre-construction. One is like it doesn't get built for a while. You get great tenants as a result. There's no, and right now, as of right now, there's no rent control. But the price you pay for it is like $1,400, $1,600 a square foot. And you can't really add value as an investor. You can't really add value to it because it's essentially it's a finished product. And I'm looking at some of these projects and wondering, does it make sense? And for some people it does. They may not care about the cash flow. They just care about appreciation. However, I'm seeing a lot of people getting into these projects and getting over their heads because even now I have conversations with people who purchased pre-construction in the last 2 years and cannot qualify on closing because rates have gone up or the appraisals are not coming in properly at the value that they need. Mm-hmm. And they're forced to make some really difficult decisions. Whereas if you bought something today that you knew exactly what rate you're getting, you know what kind of rents you're getting, and you're going to close on it next month, you're already set and you know how that stands. Whereas something 2-3 years down the road, there's some uncertainty there, right? You don't have control over the market. So I'm not going to knock pre-construction. I will say this, that if you will go pre-construction route, there are certainly some benefits. I would go long-term, go 5 years out, because that will help it increase in value, give you that time value there. And I go with a reputable builder. Go with someone with deep pockets, because there have been stories about some builders that are asking on closing 50, 100, 200,000 more on closing, or else they won't basically do business with you, or they won't close on the property. It's quite an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, and it's crazy that they're allowed to do that, but their contracts give them a lot of rights.
Yeah, they draft the contracts. There's their lawyers. I know a building in Mississauga. It's went bankrupt. It's a smaller builder. COVID got in the way, supply chain issues, but quite honestly, they didn't manage it properly. And let's say a $450,000 purchase. Luke, take a guess how much they wanted for that unit in order for the investor to close.
Probably something crazy like 550,000.
650, 700.
That's crazy.
200,000 more. Right?
Well, the other thing with these pre-construction is, again, the rental income versus the values are, you get much lower rent compared to what you could do, let's say, with a duplex conversion or something like that, to the point that you don't get the rental offsets you need to keep building your portfolio. So in terms of, as you phrased it earlier, what was it, your borrowing pool, your leverage pool, something like that you used? The credit pool that you have access to, that gets eaten up much faster with a pre-construction. So if you're looking to scale further, it's going to be harder, starting from pre-construction. But if you're only planning on doing one, then that's not as much of a factor.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Any real estate is better than no real estate, in my opinion, okay? So that's the one thing I will say. And there is a place for pre-construction, I would say. As far as people want to be passive, they want that great tenant profile that I mentioned earlier. They want a good location. I mean, you can't go wrong with like Toronto as an example. But there are other options out there that perhaps you're not considering.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're going to wrap up, Tom. You mentioned earlier you had an ebook, and also where can people find that? And otherwise, where can people get in touch with you if they're interested in becoming a client, or if they have questions for you or want to find out more about you?
Yeah, I love meeting new people, talking about real estate investing. So I'm based out of Mississauga, but I cover pretty much an hour radius throughout the GTA there. So our office, I'm with Royal LePage Signature, then the number is 905-568-2121. If you're interested in the free ebook, the website is Flip Homes GTA, so homes with an S.com. So again, fliphomesgta.com. And there you'll see some of our before and after videos and so forth of some of our projects. So yeah, reach out and we can chat.
That's really cool. Well, thanks so much for joining, Tom. And thank you everyone for watching our second ever episode of the Self Wealth Real Estate Podcast. Take care.